Hey friends, it's Rachel. Welcome back to my channel, and in today's video I will be doing a review of Lockwood Co by Jonathan Stroud. This is my favorite series and I've been wanting to do a review on it for some time, but I wasn't sure how to go about it. What can I say that hasn't already been said, and how can I convey my love of this series into words in a way that makes sense? And truth be told, I'm not sure that I can do it, but I'm going to attempt it anyway. This was the series that got me back into reading. There was something that happened in my life to where I did not read for basically an entire year, and I wasn't doing any writing during that time either. And then after that was over with, I decided I wanted to get back into writing, but knew that I needed to get back into reading first. And so The Screaming Staircase, the first book in this series, is the first book that I picked up to get back into reading. And I remember my first impression was, oh no, this book is written in first-person point of view. And the reason I thought that is because I've had bad experiences with books that are written in this point of view. Most of the time I think it's more of a hindrance than a help, and that most books would probably be better served if they were written in third-person point of view, but that is not the case with this book. This is also the only book where I've read the first line and I knew immediately that I was going to love it. That has not happened before or since. There are 5 books in this series, starting with The Screaming Staircase, The Whispering Skull, The Hollow Boy, The Creeping Shadow, and The Empty Grave. This is a YA middle grade series that follows ghost hunters, and the reason I say YA middle grade is because technically in the bookstore I found these books in the middle grade section, but in my opinion they're more YA, simply because, as one person put it online, how many people have to die to get into the YA section? So what is this book about? This book takes place in London, but not London as we know it. For the past 50 years, there has been a ghost or visitor infestation called the Problem. And the only people who can see these ghosts are children or young people. Adults cannot see them. So various agencies have cropped up around London, which are controlled by adults, and they hire children who can see the ghosts, and they go to various haunted locations to try to remove the ghost. And the way they do that is by finding what is called a source, which is often an important item that was somehow connected to the dead person when they were alive, and you can neutralize the source by covering it with silver or iron, both of which neutralize the ghost and prevent it from crossing over into this world from wherever it is the ghosts come from. Our main character is named Lucy Carlyle, and she is a very talented young agent who finds herself working for an agency called Lockwood Co, which consists of only 2 members, Anthony Lockwood and George Cubbins, and this is the only agency in the entirety of London that is run by young people. There are no adults involved. Lockwood is the leader of the agency. He makes all of the important decisions and he keeps things running smoothly most of the time, and George is their researcher. He likes knowledge. He does research on various haunted locations or infamous visitors or people who may have gone missing or died, who are therefore more likely to turn into visitors. So the first thing that this series does really well that I want to talk about is the world building. It's incredibly complex, and even though it takes London, a place that we know from our world and are pretty familiar with, it completely turns it on its head. So let's begin with the ghosts. There are a lot of types of ghosts, and there's like a glossary at the back of the books that tell you about all the different types of ghosts. You don't need to read that ahead of time, although I think I did. Basically, the ghosts can be summed up by 3 different types. Type 1 are very weak, they're passive, they're not aggressive, they're really not a threat to anybody so much so as a nuisance. Type 2 are very malevolent, they're violent. Usually this was like a murder victim or something like that. They resent the fact that they're dead, and they pose a serious threat to people's safety. And then type 3s are incredibly rare. In fact, some people aren't sure they exist at all, and those are ghosts that are said to be aware and that can communicate with human beings. Usually you might get some noises with some type 1s like crying or something like that, and then type 2s can usually say a phrase or 2. They're basically locked in a time loop. They may completely repeat certain actions over and over again, but they're not really going to interact. They're not going to tell you any profound statements or secrets. They're not going to tell you where their source is buried, and they're certainly not going to tell you why they've come back. So why are ghosts dangerous? Ghosts are dangerous in this world because they can ghost touch people, and if you're ghost touched, which happens when you come into contact with ectoplasm, if it touches your bare skin, if you get ghost touched, you will swell and turn blue and basically die. It's almost like an allergic reaction of sorts. You do not want to get ghost touched, and obviously since adults cannot see these ghosts, you can understand why this is such a dangerous problem to have. So dealing with malevolent type 2s, how do you protect yourself? Agents use a variety of different items when they go into haunted houses. Mostly it's rapiers. That is like the absolute thing an agent must have. It's also how you can identify an agent if they carry a sword. Obviously it's made of silver or steel, iron that repels the ghosts. They have something called iron filings, which are little like pieces of iron, little chips, which they can scatter on the ground and it can create a line that the ghost cannot cross. Iron chains are more effective because they cannot be scattered or broken the way filings can. There are also silver glass jars or chain nets, which can be used to contain and neutralize sources. You can just pop the source into the silver glass jar or drape the netting over it, and the silver will neutralize the source and prevent the ghost from returning. This is a very atmospheric series. There's just this sense of creepiness about it, and I don't know how else to describe it except atmospheric. It's very well developed. Technology has not really advanced in this world as much as it has in our world. There are various events that are ghost related or agency related put out. The agencies have little PR things that they do to promote their services that they offer or the products that they offer. For example, one of the companies that makes like lavender or silver sells things not only to the agencies but also to ordinary people that they can use in their own homes. People burn lavender. They have little channels of running water that they can use to discourage ghosts. There are little iron charms that people can hang from their windows or put around babies' wrists. It's mentioned that there's like iron bracelets they give babies when they leave the hospital. So all of those little items that are sold are manufactured by the companies that produce these things that are used to discourage ghosts, and also that they sell to the agency so that they can do their job. It's really interesting to see how there's like this whole economy behind the problem itself and the ways that it has manifested, and the opportunities that people have taken, capitalism if you will, I guess, the innovation and all the products that they have come out with, taking advantage of the situation that has been created, and also that helps people, because some of the products do help people, some of them work, and then some of them do not. There are also ghost cults, which I thought was an interesting thing. Not everybody is afraid of visitors. Not everybody thinks that their presence is a bad thing. In fact, members of ghost cults think that it's interesting. They want to communicate with the dead and try to ask them questions and find out why they're here. And you see posters for these various groups scattered around town. And of course, agents tend to think that this is very stupid and look down on them with disdain because, as I said, type 3 ghosts are the only ones that can communicate with people in any meaningful way, and they're so rare that people aren't even sure that they exist. Then we come to the characters, which really, combined with the world building, of course, is the bread and butter of this series. Our main character is Lucy. The stories are told from her point of view. She is the most relatable, well-written female character I think I've ever come across. She's fierce and strong, but she's not invincible. She has realistic weaknesses just like anybody else. And she has things that she struggles with that I think a lot of teenage girls actually relate to, and I think it's a good thing to show that in fiction and have that actually represented, because I feel like in a lot of YA stories, the characters are just perfect looking, and they could very well be Hollywood actors. They're just that hot and they're just that perfect looking. Well, Lucy has insecurities about the way that she looks, and that's very realistic, and it's okay to admit that, yeah, sometimes teenagers have acne, sometimes adults have acne. There's nothing wrong with that. It's completely normal, and all we seem to get in most YA stories is everybody's hot and perfect looking, and that's just not the case. So that was one of the things about Lucy's character that I appreciated it being portrayed, because I think it's very realistic for teenage girls to feel that way. Then we have Lockwood, who is my favorite character. He is the leader of the agency, and he's very mysterious. You don't know a lot about his past in the beginning of the series, and you do slowly learn more about that as the series goes on, and because of this, he's very mysterious. There's an aura of mystique about him, and you really want to know what it is that he's hiding. What is there that he doesn't want the others to know? He's very reluctant to open up to other people about those kinds of things, and I think having an aura of mystery about a character really helps to increase how interesting that character seems. He's also really energetic. He has bursts of energy and inspiration that are really contagious to the other characters around him, and I think that's really interesting. And then we have George, the third main character of this series. He is a researcher. He likes knowledge. He likes to go to the library, to the archives, and do all of the digging in these dusty old newspapers that Lucy does not like to do and that she can't understand why he likes to do it. but it's very important that he does because it makes him a valuable member of the team. He tries to make sure that everybody is prepared so they know what they're going to expect, what they're going into, or at least most of the time. He's also very sarcastic, which I love, and he's loyal to a fault and devastatingly honest. I love George's sense of humor. I love how scathing he can be at times. I find the humor in this book to be really funny. It's dry British wit and sarcasm, which is the kind of humor that appeals to me. I feel like sometimes it's the kind of humor that I have. Oftentimes when I read something that's supposed to be funny, I don't find it funny at all, particularly banter. I don't think banter is well done in a majority of books, especially YA. It just comes across as being really cringy and stupid, and that people really wouldn't talk like this, and if they did, you'd probably want to punch them. It really just comes across that you're trying too hard when it comes to this banter, but that's not true in this book. The banter is real banter. There are arguments between the characters that are organic and real and make sense, and they're not just thrown in there to force conflict. As far as the writing style goes, I mentioned that it's told in first-person point of view, from Lucy's point of view, but this is first-person point of view done right. Most of the time I don't like it because it hinders the story rather than helps. We're stuck inside the head of only one character the whole time, and so we only know what that character knows. But that's not true with Lucy, and I think that it's a very interesting lesson that you can take away from this book. I know that there is a particular story that I've had for years that needs to be rewritten badly, and I do want to tell it from the first person point of view, and I think that if I do decide to stick with this and one day do write that story in first person point of view, I will have learned a lot about how to do that successfully from this series alone. And the reason for that is it doesn't actually feel like first person point of view. Lucy is not obsessed solely with her own thoughts and feelings. She pays attention to those around her, and because she knows the others around her, or she pays attention and observes and picks up on cues, you have a pretty good idea of what those other characters are thinking and feeling, even though you don't know that for sure. We're never inside their heads, so we don't get their point of view, but because Lucy pays attention and doesn't focus only on herself, the way a lot of YA characters seem to do in this myopic, selfish, narcissistic way, it doesn't feel like first-person point of view at all. It almost feels like it is third-person point of view because you do get these insights into what these other characters are thinking and feeling simply because Lucy either knows them so well or she pays attention. And so in that regard, it doesn't feel hindering at all, like the way a lot of first-person stories do. And so if I do write a book one day in first-person point of view, that is what I'm going to try to attempt, is to make it feel like it's not first-person point of view because the character, even though we're in their head, focuses on other characters. So you do get input from them and not just one character. Despite this being a YA/middle grade story, it is pretty dang creepy, because if you think about some of the things that the characters encounter, if you encountered that in real life, it would be pretty disturbing, very creepy. They come across human remains, for example, because usually there are human remains near where the ghost is. Not always, but most of the time there are human remains involved. There are ghosts that take on some pretty grotesque appearances. There are lots of different types of ghosts, as I said. I went through the main types, type 1, 2, and 3, but there are more specific things. Like, for example, there's something called a raw bones, which, as you can imagine, is pretty horrific looking. There are also limbless ghosts, which don't need any explanation at all. At one point in one scene, the characters come across a ghost who has no eyes and is searching for their eyes, so it's very creepy. And so that's why, in my opinion, it should be more YA than middle grade, just one of the reasons. Also, because even though the characters are younger than a lot of YA characters are, they don't act it. They act very mature for their age, most of the time. Not like in an unrealistic way, but I do think that if you had young people who basically created their own business and who may or may not have family members anymore, or family members that are supportive and active in their life, they would act more mature than somebody who doesn't have any of that stuff. For example, you take The Hunger Games, it's a YA story, but I never felt like Katniss was immature in the way that some YA characters can be, and that's completely to be expected because of the situation that she grew up in. So I think that when you have characters who have had life experiences that basically force them to grow up or to take a more adult, mature role in their own life, it makes sense. So these characters are more mature than they would appear to be based on their ages alone, but of course they're not adults, and it doesn't come across in an unrealistic way because, like I said, there are arguments, they do fight about petty stuff sometimes. But that's one of the things that I appreciated, that the characters seem to be more mature than what you might typically encounter in middle grade or young adult. And so that's also why I think that it seems more young adult than middle grade, because of the dark, creepy nature of the series and what these characters have to deal with, what they see. This is their livelihood. livelihood. This is how they make a living. They go out to haunted places, they put their lives at risk, and they neutralize the sources and make these places safe. And in doing so, there's a very real threat to their own lives. They could die, and they see some pretty creepy, gruesome things while they're at it. So that is just something that I wanted to throw out there, something to keep in mind. It is a bit creepy. One of the other things that I loved about this series is that even though it's kind of like paranormal fantasy, there are mysteries that are tied into it. And as somebody who loves mysteries, I appreciated this. Each book in the series has its own central mystery surrounding it. So for example, in the first book, The Screaming Staircase, the characters are hired to eradicate the ghosts within a very haunted mansion. And so there's lots of myths and legends surrounding this mansion and why it came to be as haunted as it is. And of course, there's the mystery as to the central haunting in this mansion. What is behind it? What is it? How do we get rid of it? So each story in this series has a mystery that is central to that book in particular, but the series as a whole has an overarching mystery to it. Why is the problem a problem? What caused it? Because 50 years ago, there weren't all these ghost infestations. So what happened? What changed to make the visitors come back? And as the series goes on, the characters become one step closer to solving this overarching mystery. I could talk more and more about specific examples from the books in the later part of the series and things that I love about them, but because those are spoilers, I'm not going to mention them here. I just highly encourage people to read it. I have read The Screaming Staircase at least 11 times, possibly 12 at this point, and I just keep rereading them because they are that good. And so I will just briefly give you the summary of The Screaming Staircase and what it is about. So in the first book in this series, Lucy, Lockwood, and George are hired to investigate a haunting in a house. The residents who lived there were an elderly man and woman, and the woman has moved out because her husband, the man, died falling down the stairs, and now his ghost is haunting the house. And the woman, the wife, wants to sell the house, but they can't until it's made safe. So they hire Lockwood, Lucy, and George to investigate and clear out the haunting. However, while they're there, the investigation goes awry. It does not go according to plan, disaster ensues, and so through a series of unfortunate events, Lockwood Co. are forced to amass a large amount of money in a very short amount of time. So in order to save their agency, they agreed to investigate the haunting of Coombe Carey Hall, which is rumored to be the most haunted house in all of England. That is where the Screaming Staircase is rumored to be, inside this haunted mansion, along with the infamous Red Room. And so the question is, are they going to be able to survive the horrors of Coombe Carey Hall? Are they going to be able to pay off their debts? What is going to be uncovered? What is going to happen? And it's just phenomenal. The way that the plot unfolds in this book is just perfect. I'm not sure that the perfect book exists, but if it does, The Screaming Staircase is a pretty good candidate for that, because it doesn't matter how many times that I've read this book, I am just impressed by the way that the plot points unfold in this story and how everything is connected. As both a reader and a writer, I can definitely appreciate this. So there you have it. I hope that I have convinced you to pick up this series and give it a try if you haven't already. If you have, please let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. Did you like it? There is a Netflix adaptation of this series that is supposed to be coming very soon. However, I highly encourage you to read the series because it is going to be better than the Netflix show. I'm sorry, it just is. I can say that for certainty. This is one of the things that's just going to be better. The book is going to be better. Sometimes I do think that the film adaptation is better than the book, but this is not going to be one of those cases. I am 100% certain and confident in saying that. Without giving away any spoilers for the later books of the series, I don't know what more I can say to try to convince you to read it. The characters are all amazing and unique with their own personalities and voices, and some of the characters that you hate at the beginning of the series, you might find your mind being changed later on. The world building is complex and atmospheric, and I just love the world that has been created here. And I'm not usually a fan of something that's like urban fantasy, where you mix like paranormal with the world as we know it, which is basically what's happened here, but I love this series so very much. It means a lot to me. It is still my favorite series. And I am just forever grateful to this book series for what it means to me. It came to me at a point in my life where I was in a very low place, and this was absolutely the perfect story to get me back into reading. I don't know if it would have been as successful as it was if I had picked up something else to try to read first. This definitely was the best thing that I could have picked up to get me back into reading and therefore back into writing, and I think that I owe a lot to that. So that is all I have for you. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, feel free to leave a like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future content. I appreciate each and every one of you. I will see you in the next video, and go read Lockwood & Co. Bye!